It's my pleasure and honor to introduce Joan Walsh, an award-winning author, reporter, editor, national affairs correspondent for The Nation, CNN political contributor, Salon's first news editor. She served as editor-in-chief for 6 years. Joan has written for publications ranging from the Vogue to The Nation, for newspapers including the New York Times, the Washington Post, the LA Times, San Francisco Chronicle. Author of the book, What's the Matter with White People? Finding Our Way in the Next America, which the Philadelphia Daily News called one of the best books of 2012. It's even more relevant now. Author Anne Lamott, love her, described it, quote, as a brilliant and illuminating book about America since the upheavals of the 60s and 70s. Joan is an avid baseball fan. She's the co-author of splash hit, The Pacific Bellpark Story, about the building of San Francisco Giants' legendary waterfront stadium. I just want to say, I was talking to Joan's editor the other day, Emily Douglas. We were talking about the important, really unmatched reporting on the fight to rebuild democratic power on the state and local level. Joan is missing her deadline right now. She's doing a story about the power of state legislators and women in state legislators, and on the ways newly democratic state legislatures can push progressive priorities and expand their constituencies. Her piece on Virginia was a test case early in looking at the power of state legislatures. She's also done deep movement reporting, really the heart and soul of the nation's work, on the creation of new grassroots organizations seeking to block the worst of Trump's misdeeds. We all know about Indivisible now, but when Joan profiled it, it wasn't as well known. And she's always casting a close eye on the ongoing challenges facing women in politics. As the primary campaign wound down, she covered the double standards still dogging women in politics, and has written many of our great profiles of feminist elected leaders. Her profile of Pramila Jayapal was just terrific, and I recommend you go back and find it. Maybe someone can post it. And I want to just finish with her 2018 Nation essay. If you haven't read it, go back. Recounting an extraordinary week of TV in 1968 when the legendary Harry Belafonte stepped in for Johnny Carson to host The Tonight Show. It was a monumental moment in which an African-American would be really the face of the most dominant program in late night for an entire week. His guests included Lena Horne, Paul Newman, associated with The Nation for many years, Martin Luther King Jr. and Bobby Kennedy before their assassination. She wrote an essay about the week of shows, told Belafonte about it, and the result is a terrific documentary, The Sit-In, Harry Belafonte Hosts the Tonight Show, which Joan co-produced and whose premiere at Tribeca was sadly canceled due to COVID. Currently, Joan is covering the most important election of our lives. I know she'll talk about it. From her recent interview with Stacey Abrams to her unpacking of calls to defund the police, to her coverage of AOC's spellbinding rebuke of Representative Yoho or Hoyo, whatever. Those reports are invaluable glimpses into both the instigators and obstacles to change. So welcome, Joan. She's going to speak to us for about 10 minutes, and then if I'll ask a question or turn it over to the ACE questioners who signed up. Thank you.
Thank you, Katrina. That is so sweet. And, you know, honestly, none of that could I have done anywhere else, really. I mean, Katrina, when I was hired, Katrina and I talked about my idea for this Harry Belafonte documentary, but I'm not a documentary maker. And she was like, well, just write a story. And this was back when I worked for Salon. And then when I came over, I was like, really? And she and other editors gave me the space to do that. And, you know, the same with covering the state house races. I mean, I'm not going to blame Barack Obama. He gets blamed for a lot, but he did an amazing job given his situation. But for whatever reason, under the Democrats, when they had power in DC, they lost almost 1,000 seats in state legislatures. I mean, they used to be a Democratic stronghold, but there was a concerted plan to take them back. It was Karl Rove and, you know, North Carolina's Art Pope and a whole bunch of other people and dark money funders. And it just went on in plain sight, and Democrats didn't fight back. But since the Trump, you know, nightmare, that's been the first place where the resistance really showed itself. I mean, obviously the Women's March and other marches were huge, but Virginia had a state House of Delegates election in 2017. And I was lucky enough to go to an Emily's List training where I met most of the women who were running, and very few of them were given a chance, but 15 Democrats swept their elections, and 11 of them were women. And that was the beginning of a resistance that super focused on state legislatures. And so I'm doing a follow-up about 2020 where there's some good news and some bad news, but mainly good news. Democrats are still focused there because we saw, which we should have known before, we saw that, you know, they called the states laboratories of democracy. The states became laboratories of reaction. And what those Republicans did who took over state houses in Ohio, Wisconsin, North Carolina, Michigan, Pennsylvania, they passed hideous anti-abortion bills. They passed hideous voter suppression bills. Also got to many of them, the states that let the legislature control, I'm calling it gerrymandering because that's what it is, but redistricting. They, you know, gerrymandered. And that's why even in Wisconsin, and you know, a bunch of states, Wisconsin, North Carolina, there are a couple of others, Democrats get 50% plus of the votes, but get fewer than half of the state leg seats as well as the congressional district seats. So there's still this year a push to take back state houses. And to me, in a way, that's the most exciting thing going on because it involves groups from DSA to Emily's List to, you know, official Democratic Party stalwarts, and then the whole group of pop-up organizations that grew after Trump got elected, Sister District, Swing Left, Flippable, and they've really become like a semi-institution at that level. And what we've seen in a lot of states is that when you build an infrastructure at the state level, when you run and contest seats that haven't been challenged for 20 or 30 years because they're considered red districts, you have a trickle up effect. It's not, you know, we think about when you have top of the ballot, governor's race, presidential race, that trickles down. Actually, what we've seen in a lot of states is a trickle up effect where Democrats have organized at the state level, and then they give ballast to the national and state folks who are running. And so it's really interesting because I don't know how many of you have been on our cruises, but our last cruise, Dr. Fergie Reed Sr. and Jr. were on, and they just gave me a master class in what they're trying to do. And they started in Virginia, which is now a trifecta of Democratic governor, state House of Delegates, and Senate. But now they're taking on Florida, where, you know, they don't live, but they've recruited a slate of 36 people, Democrats. And so, you know, they're giving Republicans a real run. The interesting thing is, you would think that Democratic leadership would be excited about this, but they're not that excited, or a lot of them are not that excited. They're simply into incumbent protection. The money should go to the incumbents, and some of them are into the lobbyist money that comes. So it's an interesting place to be fighting. And, you know, I'm thrilled to be able to do this. In other years, when I've done these stories, I have traveled to the places where I am profiling. So I'm doing my best to write a colorful piece about some people I've never met. And so, you know, that's a challenge, but it inspires me. You know, I will do everything I can to elect Joe Biden, but obviously he wasn't my candidate and he wasn't a lot of our candidates. Yeah, you know, we can answer questions about the Veep stakes. John Nichols wrote in our pages the other day, and I really do agree, I always agree with John, but you know, he is being pushed, pulled, whatever, to the left. And so I believe I will get more excited about him as the weeks go on. I pray that that's true, but whatever. I'm excited as I need to be because this regime has to go. And I don't know how many people watched Bill Maher yesterday. I'm going to come clean. I barely watched it because I couldn't stand it. His smug face that, you know, he's called establishment. And some of you may remember that actually when he was chosen, he was actually defended or advanced by some somewhat liberal people as he's establishment. He, you know, he's better than Jeff Sessions. He's far worse than Jeff Sessions. He's smarter, but he's far worse. Jeff Sessions had the integrity to recuse himself from the various investigations into the campaign. Barr would never do that. And so, you know, there's so much that we need to have happen. And I'm just grateful that I work for the Nation, where I have colleagues who are engaged in this every day. We get on email, we get on Slack, we chat it through, we figure out what our priorities should be. And, you know, we do the best job we can, even during this horrible pandemic. So with that, I'm just gonna turn it back to Katrina. And
thank you. Thank you. It's just wonderful to work with you. And, you know, one of the things I think the Nation does so well is amplify the social movements. But it's an exciting time because there's an understanding that street heat also has electoral heat. And there's a new generation of insurgents. And also, you know, people who are no longer insurgents, but were insurgents, like Katie Porter, who's going to be on a call soon, or Pramila Jayapal, who the Nation met in 2015 when she was a state senator in Washington State, and who is now a leading, you know, member of the House. Whoever watched, you know, who watched the Barr grilling yesterday. And I think she's in line, and I think Joan agrees, possibly to be speaker. Yeah. She's a real force. She's savvy, she's strategic, and she understands the connection between movement and strategy, as does someone like AOC. And what struck me, and I'll stop, is in New York State, and Joan's been covering all states, but the New York State Assembly has really changed. And you saw people identifying themselves as AOC endorsed. And so it was exciting. I wanted to ask you, Joan, it's a less uplifting question, but, you know, we're witnessing Biden's polling, and we're careful about polling. It's looking good, but we're also witnessing one of the most unprecedented elections this country is ever going to have because of voting systems. And Trump continues to discredit vote by mail as fraudulent. There's no evidence, but it is going on. And there's also talk that he won't accept the outcome. There's even a Washington Post headline today. Trump demurs, and as Trump demurs, an unimaginable question forms: could the president reach for the military in a disputed election? My question to you is, where do the state legislatures, what you've been covering, we have a crazy mosaic at best of voting rules. Right. So where would state legislators, how would they play a role?
Well, you know, a lot of voting, for better or worse, and it's often worse because we can't do as much federally as we might like to, or we would like to under Democrats. For better or worse, a lot of it is a state responsibility. And so, you know, we've seen Andrew Cuomo agree to send absentee ballot applications. We've started to see other states, even in Republican states, realize that they need to facilitate vote by mail. So that is mainly a state responsibility. Counties and localities, they have a role too. But it's interesting because of the pandemic, and you know, I think there's a real debate or confusion among Republicans at the state level about well, about the right thing to do, which, first of all, they should just do the right thing, but also about their constituencies. As we're seeing this hit red states, their secretaries of state, their governors, their legislators are having to grapple with, well, our red voters, our Republican voters who tend to be older, they might not want to go to the polls, And so it's a mixed bag. I mean, Trump consistently demeans it and casts fear, creates fear that it's a form of fraud, even as he uses it, and his whole family has voted by mail, but I'm seeing a lot. I mean, Iowa, red states are getting in gear to facilitate vote by mail. I mean, there's also the question of whether the post office will exist in November or, exist as we know it. And that's terrifying. But, and if anybody's, sent mail in the last 4 months, good luck. I've never had so many pieces of mail go missing in my whole long life. So that's a little scary too, because, ballots could go missing. But, I'm worried about it. But Katrina, you know me, I'm like, I try to be optimistic. Number one, that's my number one thing. But I also, if I'm going to worry, I'm going to worry about something that's coming up right ahead of us. And I'm going to leave, November 6th, 8th, 10th to future worry.
All right, this is wise stance. I'm going to turn it over to Erin, who I know there's so many questions. So I'm going to restrain myself from the sweepstakes question. That the sweepstakes are important, but it's also important who's in the cabinet and the agencies. Anyway.
Absolutely.
So, Joan, there's a conversation was going on in the chat about gerrymandering, people from North Carolina and Wisconsin. And
oh, yay.
Yay. And we know that voter suppression is going to take many forms. And I wonder what you see the GOP trying to, what's in the works right now to suppress the vote, and what are we doing about it? And I know, and I know you've spent quite a bit of time with Stacey Abrams, who's doing heroes work on voting rights.
Well, in individual states, people are, in every state, including the red states or purple states, there are really great organizations, not quite like Stacey's, because there's nothing like that, but doing work on voter suppression or to fight voter suppression. But I really do feel like, certainly North Carolina, it's got a full slate of candidates. The Democrats have a full slate of candidates. They are really, they got a boost by the court decision a couple of years ago that found their maps had surgically targeted African Americans. It's a very memorable phrase. Targeted with surgical precision, trying to disempower African Americans. And so they have some new maps. They're not perfect by any means, but they're better. But this is part of why I'm always talking about looking at your state legislative races, because that's where the action is, and that's where there could be a backlash. The Republican State Legislative Committee, RSLC, they were on their heels for the last few cycles, but just last quarter they outraised their Democratic counterpart. So they are coming back to make, to take this seriously again. So I'm a little bit concerned about that, but I would just urge everyone, we can't knock doors at this point, at least in most states, but, find a good, challenger in your area, a Democratic challenger at either, state house or Senate level. And whatever else you do, support him or her. And they're likely to be a her, because that's who's running for these races. So it makes you feel good, because a little bit of effort or a little bit of money goes such a long way in a way that it doesn't in a congressional district or, you know, certainly a Senate race and, you know, for president. But anyway, Erin, that's where it's got to happen.
Katrina mentioned that you're working on a story about several races. Christine Jacobs is wondering if you're covering Pennsylvania, because she points out there's a chance of flipping the House and maybe the Senate this year with progressive women. But aside from Pennsylvania, you know, who are you covering, and what do you see as the big moments come November?
I am covering, I'm mentioning and, you know, writing a little bit about Pennsylvania, but right now, what I think my focus is, I don't know if my editor Emily is on here, maybe she wants to chime in. But what I'm trying to focus on is women of color who are running for a second time. And I'm also not exclusively, but heavily looking at states that have a Republican state trifecta, which means Republicans control the governor's house, the state and both houses of the state legislature. And if you look at that, what you see is that the states where the pandemic is raging, Arizona, Texas, Florida, increasingly Georgia, Alabama, they all have Republican trifectas. And so people are starting to feel like some of those states have a chance of flipping. Pennsylvania is awesome. Pennsylvania has so much grassroots, so many individuals. It's its own story, and maybe I'll do that down the road. But for right now, the trifecta states and women trying to run.
So Joan, you're breaking up a little bit. I wonder if you could just repeat the part you said. Pennsylvania was awesome, and then what was the trifecta of?
You know, I could plug in an Ethernet cable, which I guess I should have thought of before. I mean, I don't mind. I'll just get up. You guys will see me. It'll take a second. Hi.
Okay. Hi.
I can't really dress up. You know, I look good.
I'm gonna look at your books. Ooh, I like the Bob.
Right.
Okay.
Technology.
You know. Let's see. Because I was getting that message too, which was slightly distracting. I should have taken you on a tour of my little apartment. Anyway, I hope that helps. What I said was, I think Pennsylvania is really amazing because I don't
Joan, you're frozen now.
You know, the women. No. Okay, hold on.
There you are.
Maybe, I hate to ask Joan to do that, but let's see how it goes. Someone suggested turning off video, but we like to integrate voice video.
Is that better?
That is better.
You're better now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think it took a second to turn itself on.
Again.
Perfect.
Anyway, the scholar Laura Putnam has studied everything from the Women's March in Pennsylvania, around, you know, the many marches around Pennsylvania, to this surge in state legislative activism, and also measured the number of Black Lives Matter protests in Pennsylvania. And it's astonishing. It's like little white towns, little red towns. Yeah, you're all making me think Pennsylvania is actually worth a story in itself. So, so yeah, and it's got really great challengers for state legislature. But what I was saying is, I'm pretty much looking at places that have a Republican trifecta where the Republicans control all branches of government and they're botching the coronavirus response. So, which is I mean, it's tragic, but it's helping Democrats. So
we have a few questions about, well, get out the vote strategies. Ann Martin, who I think you know from the cruise, she's wondering, she's pointing out that people have some really pressing problems right now. And, how do you engage somebody who's thinking about food or their electric bill or their health with politics and voting? And C. Shambin is also asking, oh, excuse me, going to that question next, apologies. Maureen Barbara Jackson is asking about get out the vote strategies. So, we've got, the typical get out the vote isn't necessarily going to work right now. So how do we respond and how do we help?
Look, everyone is making this up as we go along. I mean, and I've had, especially some of these female challengers, one of them said, door knocking was my superpower. Like, I loved it, I was great at it, and I can't do it right now. The resistance was really powered by door knocking and people, canvassing and building relationships with their neighbors. So it's a big blow. There's no way around it in terms of democratic organizing this year, and all the way from reaching people, getting out your message, to getting out the vote. I will say there are a lot of people innovating, with Zoom, as here we all are. Also, more than a couple of candidates have told me, they're using their text lists to do wellness checks. They're literally checking in, not just to say, hey, vote for me, will you give out my literature? Will you da-da-da-da? But like, how are you? How's your family? And that is getting a lot of response. Other people have told me people have a lot of time to talk on the phone right now. So folks who wouldn't necessarily answer a phone are like, what, this politician, or I don't know who this is, I'm not answering. I still don't answer, but I'm not your average person. They're answering, and then they're talking for a longer period of time. So, folks are trying to make lemonade out of lemons. It's definitely lemons, but the organization around getting people to vote by mail, get absentee ballots, it's all happening, right now. So that's good.
Do you have any insight into how the polls are going to work? This is C. Shambin's question is about poll workers, because a lot of them are reconsidering if they should be volunteering in that position. From personal experience, my mother's been a poll worker for, I don't know, probably 15 years, and she did not work the last primary. So, how's that structure going to work?
I'm not sure. I mean, I had to vote in person because my absentee ballot didn't get here in time in our New York primaries. So we had a full slate of poll workers when I went to my poll, and I thanked them all. And there was hand sanitizer everywhere, and you were checked before you came in that you had a mask. I don't know. I mean, some of it's going to depend on where we are in the pandemic in November, which I think is going to vary greatly state to state. But it's going to be tough. I mean, I assume it's going to be tough. And there's ultimately, in the end, no substitute for people are going to need to vote the day on election day. As much as you can do vote by mail and early voting. I mean, I think it's great. Even Republican states are increasing vote by mail. Somewhat vote by mail, but also early voting. I'm blanking on who did it today. Some Republican governor extended today. Anyway, I think it's something I'm very worried about, and I can't just reassure people that it's going to be fine.
Kristen Cabral wrote earlier in the chat that she's happy to help turn Virginia blue, and we're happy for her help. And let's say the best thing happens, Pamela Talese is pointing out, that people on this call might not be super excited for Biden, but Biden's going to get our support. And that when he wins, fingers crossed, he's really going to have to act. He's going to have to do things to make people's lives substantially better, and they're going to have to feel it. So, what can be done?
Well, he released his economic plan last week. He's got a women's plan that he released yesterday. I mean, as I said, John believes he's stepping up on climate in a way that he wasn't a few months ago. I think he gets that this is an FDR moment. This isn't a Jimmy Carter moment. It's not even a Barack Obama moment. I mean, I hate to look back at what might have been had Barack Obama really understood the level of Republican perfidy that he was going to deal with. That might have been a better moment. But anyway, it's going to be far worse. And so, I think that Biden, despite his ties to banks and, credit card companies, et cetera, I think he really believes in public employment. And, I think the pandemic has created a huge necessity for, contact tracing, testing, contact tracing. You could create so many jobs. You just have to do it in a smart way, which some states and cities are not doing. I think he, unlike Barack Obama, really believes in a public works program that will be necessary, I think, because so many jobs will disappear. I think he believes in the jobs part of the Green New Deal now, even if he's not ready to go as far as some of us want him to go. So, I think he's starting to see himself as a, world historical figure stepping in at a point when if he doesn't really step up, if he doesn't really deliver and solve some of these problems, I don't know what will happen. So I think he gets that, when obviously he didn't when he started his campaign. He was all like, nothing's going to change. Don't worry. Your taxes won't go up. Nothing big will change. You'll all be fine. And now he's starting to sound very different.
Marjorie Harrison put a comment in, I think, around your discussion about campaigns reaching out to do health checks. She's saying that retired teachers and other retired public employees in Florida are doing statewide phone canvassing with wellness checks, and that it's going well. So,
oh, that's really interesting. Not connect. I'm assuming it sounds like not connected to any candidates, but just to, make sure people are okay.
We will let her reply in the chat, and we'll find out. That's what it sounds like. Yeah. And the VP choice is any day now, right?
It is.
Yeah. So, let's hit you with the Veep question. How important is this choice? What signal does it send to Biden's base and really to all of us? And we know that given Biden's age, whoever this is could be the leader of the free world.
Right. I mean, it's a huge deal that he promised to select a woman. So, I start there, and I just feel like whatever happens, I want to be happy about that. Having said that, I thought it was great that Amy Klobuchar dropped out and said he should pick a woman of color. A lot of people perceive that as a, way to undermine Elizabeth Warren, as a woman and as also as a centrist, doing the dirty work of the centrist faction in the party that doesn't want to see Warren. I have no idea what's going on, to be honest. And I say that as someone, my daughter now works for Katie Porter. She manages her campaign. She was Kamala Harris's Iowa political director. So full disclosure, I ask her every day. And she's like, I don't know. Like, does Katie know? No. shut up, stop asking me. So all of, and I have other inside sources and they're all like, we don't know. And, this recent malarkey, Joe Biden would say, where Chris Dodd went out and said, we're not picking Kamala because she has no remorse for her attacks during the debate. It was a terrible strategy. I mean, even if you're just going to pick another Black woman, like I love Karen Bass, I've lived in California for 30 years. I've known her forever. She's amazing. But to pit two Black women against each other like that just takes a lot of white male privilege. I don't know. That was awful. It also, I think, set the stage for, if Biden doesn't pick Kamala Harris, there will be more anger than there would have been before. I don't know. I mean, what I heard from the beginning was, the really cliche, he wants to pick someone who can be president on day one, so not Sarah Palin. And that to me meant Warren or Harris. I don't know that many people can step up from the House of Representatives. And, I like Susan Rice, but she's never run for office. So part of me feels like it's just all a big smokescreen for whether he, goes to his left and picks Warren or his center left and picks Harris. So if other people have ideas, I'm happy to hear them because I'm going to have to write about it when it happens. So let me know what you want to know.
I want to go back to some of your comments when you were opening, and you were talking about the tension between the DNC and their strategy that protects incumbents and doesn't help necessarily widen the Democratic elected base, versus advocates like Fergie Sr., versus people raising their hand to step into campaigns and to step into voids of Democratic leadership. And I don't know if it's always so clear how the national party puts their thumb on the scale. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that tension.
Well, honestly, I don't think the national party puts their thumb on the scale so much. I mean, we talk about the DNC all the time, but they don't really get involved in state races. There is a Democratic legislative campaign committee that is related to the DNC, but pretty much independent. The real issue is in a state, you have a bunch of people, and if they're Democrats in the majority, they want to stay in the majority and they're not that interested in adding to their majority, which is crazy. And even if they're in the minority, so state Democratic House members have a caucus, and state Democratic Senate members have their own caucus. They raise money, they support candidates. But they're really incumbent protection rackets because they get money from incumbents and lobbyists. So they want to support their incumbents. And, in Virginia, for example, in 2017, the state Democratic caucus, I don't want to single them out because they weren't terrible, but they weren't good. They thought they could pick up 5 to 7 seats. And so they invested in, there were a bunch of districts where Hillary Clinton actually won, but Republicans held those seats. So those were their targets. They ultimately picked up 15 seats, but it was with the help of all these outside groups, because Virginia in 2017, for anyone who's here from Virginia, was like the major game in town. And so a lot of outside groups put their money in Virginia. That happens everywhere. Some state caucuses are better than others, but for the most part, they exist for incumbent protection. And so what's been really great about the anti-Trump resistance is that state legislative races are a way to have a lot of influence with either not that much time or not that much money. And, where a congressional race could cost, tens of millions of dollars, some of these state house and senate races are in five figures. I mean, it's going up and big states like Florida and Texas, it costs more. But so that's what it really is. It's not the national party, but it is these little self-dealing caucuses. And you can understand their self-interest. The head of the Democratic Party, the House Democratic Caucus in Virginia, when I challenged him on this, said to me, for years I was just trying to defend my tiny minority and make sure it didn't get any smaller. So, how was I going to know that this year we would have, all these really great targets? So you can kind of sympathize, but, not so much. We really would like to have more visionary leaders everywhere, especially in the States.
Yeah. Larry Bradley is wondering about Biden's priorities besides the Supreme Court. Should a priority be instituting election reforms like ranked choice voting, Voting Rights Act that restricts gerrymandering and voter suppression? Do you see any of that on the horizon?
I do. I mean, I'm not sure about ranked choice voting, but the first thing that the Democrats did when they took over the House in 2019 was pass a sweeping bill about having to do with voting rights, restoring the Voting Rights Act, restoring, the Section 4, the pre-clearance requirement, I believe it makes Election Day a holiday. They've now renamed that the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. And I truly believe, depending on whether Democrats take the Senate, and assuming, which I don't want, whatever, if there is a President Joe Biden and a Democratic Senate, I truly believe that will be the first bill that he signs. And so, I think they get how hard they have to work at the federal level to restore voting rights and deal with voter suppression and gerrymandering. But again, voting is a state responsibility. I don't even think I understood that. And I was a history major and I used to think I was pretty smart, but I remember when we had the Florida recount and we learned about, the butterfly ballot and all these horrible things that were done in Florida and all the different rules about the recount, people were like, well, we need federal legislation to deal with this. But actually federal legislation cannot deal with a lot of that. If you want to have a butterfly ballot that's super confusing to your constituents, you can still do it.
John Vinnie McGee, who's on the call, asked about DC statehood. My memory is it is in the bill that the House passed.
I think it is. Yes, I think it is in the bill. It's a sweeping bill, and it's
really?
It
didn't get enough attention in a way, but it was important.
Right. We absolutely need DC statehood.
So sticking with our hope that the blue wave is highly effective come November, Mark is asking about the transition of power. And there's a lot of thought that Trump is going to resist the election results. Do you know anything about, what it might take to move him out of the office? Do we have any precedent, though he defies all of those? And how do we ensure that the results are perceived to be legitimate and that power changes hands?
Well, as Katrina asked me a version of this before, and I kind of punt it like, I'm going to worry about that in October. But, I think one issue that people have brought up recently that has started to worry me, and we've got to prepare for it. As a Californian for 30 years, although I've lived here for at least the last 5 in New York, California doesn't expect the election results the same night. If something's a landslide, you're going to know it, right? But, you know, Kamala Harris kind of knew that she won as senator in 2016, but when she won attorney general, it took a while. There's so much voting by mail. Washington has total voting by mail. And the more we do vote by mail, I mean, New York, we just certified our primary results a few days ago. It was supposed to be June 30th, but it lasted longer because of mail delays, et cetera. So this notion that we've all grown up with that, you know, election night, sit in front of the television, get the popcorn, you know, get some wine, you're going to know, even if it's 3 o'clock in the morning, that is, I don't think that's going to happen unless there's really a landslide. I think we're going to be waiting. And that is worrisome, especially because he's stoking so many, you know, vote by mail fraud fears that you could see that being something where he jumps on. If he loses, I don't know, he could win the day of vote, but lose the vote by mail. He could lose it and win the vote by mail. That does, because we're not culturally prepared for that. We don't have like election month, you know, hi, we try to vote by November 7th, and we will know the winner by November 30th. So just relax, because we don't have that culture. I think there's going to be a lot of conspiracy mongering if there's not a, you know, overwhelmingly we can call everything election night. So that scares me. I mean, I don't think, if you think about, I mean, this could cut both ways, right? When he went into Lafayette Park and, you know, committed fascism, there were a lot of military folks who, well, there were some who went along with it and then regretted it. There were some who spoke out. There were some who quit. I'm not a blindly pro-military person, but I don't know that the military is prepared in any way to support him in trying to illegally hold power. But I don't know, you know, and I want to say that people like, I do think Mitt Romney, but he's the only one I can literally name as he would stand up and say, you know, I don't know who else would Mitch McConnell stand up and say, Mr. President, you know, get the hell out of the White House? I don't know. But as I said to Katrina, I take deep breaths and choose not to think about that right now. So.
Fair enough. Well, let's think about this issue. Chuck Carlson is asking if you think that police and police violence and the role of police is going to be a major issue in this election, pointing out that in Shorewood, Wisconsin, it's shocking how many law and order progressives are afraid of things like defund the police and seem to get persuaded to either stay home or to vote third party.
Did he say Shorewood, Wisconsin?
Yep.
That's where I went to high school.
Yeah. Well, actually, I left that out. You said your small hometown.
Yes.
Yeah.
And one of my best friends from high school retired as Shorewood police chief.
Wow.
A few years ago. So really small world. That's interesting. I mean, I've looked at the polls. I have my own doubts and I work them through in the Nation. My own worries about the defund the police slogan, but I've seen a couple of polls where average everyday Americans really understand that as reimagine the police, give some money to social work instead. Not, I'm sure we've all seen, I hope we haven't, but many of us have seen the Trump ad that features, I think it's a older woman calling the police, and it's like, hello, there's no one here to take your call right now because Joe Biden has defunded the police. If you were raped, press 1, blah, blah, blah. We'll get back to you in 5 business days. And it's got like all these, crazy photos of protests. So they're trying to do that, but I haven't seen that really getting through. But if it's happening in Shorewood, it's probably happening everywhere. Shorewood's the bellwether.
You talked at the start again about the profiles you're writing about some of these states and now Pennsylvania.
Yes.
And can you just say a little bit about what it's like reporting during COVID? So you can't go to these places. How are you getting your information? How are you getting the color for your work?
The color's hard. I mean, I wound up doing a piece for the Nation about a murder here in my neighborhood that I started pre-COVID, and obviously I have a lot of color because I live here. But then I wound up doing most of the interviews on the phone, and it was really kind of tragic to me because, you know, part of what I love about my job is getting to meet people, not, you know, not just traveling, but even like if I'm reporting in New York, it's like, we have coffee, we, you know, meet for a drink, we have lunch. So it's hard. On the other hand, people are more available. That is definitely true. And so, you know, I guess I've gotten over these 5 months, I've gotten used to it. But that first story that I was doing about my neighborhood, about, you know, a backlash, you know, please go read it because I don't think anyone did at the time because it was during COVID. But, you know, Harlem is gentrifying. I am Exhibit A. But it's also, you know, it's developing a lot of social institutions that try to bring people together. And a young Columbia student was murdered allegedly by a couple of young African-American boys from the middle school near where I live. And, you know, starting out, I met people. I could, you know, I knew exactly where it happened. I knew the institutions that were trying to fight back. But then as I got to talking to more people, I was doing it on the phone. Doing political reporting, you know, when I did a big feature in 2018 on the beginning of this state legislative strategy, and I don't think I went anywhere because it's just too big, you know. I can't go to, I don't think I wrote about 50 states, but I probably wrote about 20. So some of these stories I'm used to being able to do by phone, but others really require, you know, if I'm going to do a profile of somebody, I don't think you can do a profile of somebody you haven't met. I mean, I don't know. I'll be challenged to do that. Katrina will think of somebody she wants me to profile.
Stacey, did you do the Stacey Abrams interview in the pandemic?
I did it on the phone, but I met Stacey. So, I mean, and even if I hadn't met Stacey, you know, but yeah, but to do I did a profile of her. I traveled with her when she ran for governor in 2018, and you know, that piece would really just be a totally different piece if I wasn't with her, if I wasn't in Savannah, if I wasn't talking to the people at her rallies and events. So it's really hard. And, you know, speaking of Shorewood, Wisconsin, the convention was supposed to be in Milwaukee, and I gather some things will happen there. And my best friend from high school has a guest suite for me to stay in Shorewood. And I don't think I'm going. I mean, we have to talk about it, but I think whatever exists, John Nichols will be able to drive by car from Madison. But like, I was really psyched about that. And, you know, now it's not going to happen. And even if it does, all the bars are going to be closed. What? Anyway, so it's a very weird time. I mean, I'm blessed. I think, you know, an interesting thing at the Nation, we've been jumping on more Zoom or Google Meet calls. I really feel like we've, you know, come together more as a group that, you know, I wasn't going to our Thursday meetings, but now I go to all of them. So there are ways that you get closer to people. And, you know, that's true in my family. We've got a every other week cousin and my elderly aunt Zoom call, other friends, but it's really different. I'm not pitching. I'd be pitching a lot more profiles. And, you know, I'm not.
You're a masterful profiler.
Thank you. It's my favorite thing to do, to be honest. So that's, you know, I was thinking about that the other day. It's hard. So thanks for asking and letting me vent.
Well, we're just have a few minutes left before I send it back to Katrina to close. I just want to let you know that nearly half the states in the country are covered by participants today, and Canada. And so we thank everybody for coming. And Joan, thank you for your time. And do you just have, what do you see as hopeful right now that you're covering? Just what's a quick message of hope for this group?
Well, I really think the continued emphasis on state legislatures is hopeful, because that's where, you know, we got all the horrible abortion laws and voter suppression. I still think, you know, the fact that these idiots, Republican idiots, are willing to spend so much money, not enough money, but, you know, comparatively a lot of money on pandemic relief, it's got to show us a way to really invest in people and, you know, invest in the essential workers that we underpay and, you know, force many of them into jobs that are making them sick. I don't know. I just have to believe, because this is my nature, that this experience is going to make us have more compassion. And I know there's a countervailing force of all the people who are saying it's a hoax and not wearing masks, but some of them are getting COVID too. Is it bad that I don't feel good that Louis Gohmert tested positive for COVID. Louis Gohmert, the really horrible Texas congressman. I don't feel good that that happened, but it could point the way to more Republicans getting that this is affecting them too. I just want to believe that it's going to leave us with more of a sense that we're all in this together. And certainly I feel like that happened in New York. I'm really proud to be a New Yorker, given what we've been through.
Thank you, Joan. And thank you, Erin, Sarah, Peter. I want to thank you for this wonderfully timely conversation and the hope, the grounded hope. It's reality-based, it's evidence-based hope. And I think the work you're doing is so vital. I take hope from the insurgency of groups, Indivisible, Run for Something, People's Action, Working Families Party, Jane Klebb taking over the Nebraska Democratic Party, women playing a vital role. Huge. And I just wanted to quote from Sasha Abramsky's interview with George Gale. Some of you may remember George and Ai-jen Poo from the cruise. I mean, he says, you know, we're in a period of major progress and also major backlash. And we have to find a way to deal with that. He's doing deep canvassing by phone, which is, I think, very exciting. I just wanted, you know, not to belabor, but FDR was a budget deficit governor when he was elected. He was moved by the times. He right. Say to Sidney Holman, the labor leader, Frances Perkins, labor secretary, first woman, go out and make me do it. The fact that no one at Hyde Park and the archives can find that doesn't matter. We still have to believe
right.
that.
We know it happened.
And I do think these times, people have been moving, I don't know, left, but towards sanity. And I think Biden has a chance, childcare, investments in people, to rethink what security means, I hope. There's been movement on the defense budget, finally. I think we could, as Joan suggests, maybe warn people that this election may be multi-day, because we don't want to see Bush v. Gore again.
Right.
That's very scary. But I want to thank you all for joining. I want to ask you to come back next week for a discussion about the Black Lives Matter protests with our justice correspondent, Ellie Mistal, our editorial.
Oh, definitely come back for that. I mean, Ellie is like the highlight of our you know, group.
I love the last question Erin asked. I love, because we could go on about how we're working together, how Joan is reporting. You know, we meet every Thursday, the entire Nation business editorial team. And I do think it's been engaging wonderfully to have Joan on. She might not be down at the office anyway, but Ellie Mistal, Dorian Warren, our editorial board member, Maurice Mitchell, our friend from the Working Families Party, and former columnist Melissa Harris Perry. So come back for that. And Katie Porter, who's Joan's daughter is working for, is going to be back. Great Congressperson Elizabeth Warren disciple, her own person, and Chris Hayes, who retired, I humbly say, at age 28, when we were running a United States Postal Service campaign, we both hung out at the committee room as Victor testified, Novaski testified, to save the Postal Service, which is a long time issue for the nation. But thank you, Joan. And
Thanks,
you all.
Katrina.
Yeah.
Thanks everybody for organizing this, and thanks for everyone for coming. Your questions were fantastic. It was really fun.
Thank you.